Dust clung to every inch of the frontier town. It hovered in the heat, settling in the creases of tired faces and on the cracked wooden signs above shuttered saloons. Horses stood still, tails swatting at flies, and somewhere, a dog barked once and went quiet. Noon meant silence in this part of the West, a silence broken only by the shuffle of boots toward the auction block. Clara Tate stood still in the middle of it all, her shawl wrapped tight across her shoulders like armor. It had once been ivory, but now bore the color of dry bone and earth. Her boots were cracked, soles near splitting, but she stood with her spine straight, like a woman who had known how to lean on no one. They said the auction wouldn't last long. Just a formality, someone muttered behind her. He's not fit for labor. No one's that foolish. From behind the pen, two men emerged dragging something behind them. Not quite willing, not quite resisting. Shackles bound his wrists and ankles, and a thick canvas sack covered his head. Shirtless, his back bore old lashes and fresh scrapes. His skin, darkened by sun and blood, made the crowd step back a little. Too dangerous, came a voice. Let him rot out there. Clara didn't blink. The auctioneer cleared his throat, sweat shining on his collar. Next and final, one Apache buck. Strong build. No name. Doesn't speak. Might be simple. Starting at 2 silver. I'll take him, Clara said. The murmurs stopped. Every man turned. Even the horses shifted. She stepped forward, fishing in the hidden pocket of her apron. The coins didn't clink. They were warm from her body and cold with consequence. She placed them on the edge of the wood block. 2 silver, she repeated, and not a cent more. Widow Tate, the preacher's wife, whispered. What are you doing? Clara didn't answer. The auctioneer looked around. No one else raised a hand. Some scoffed. Others looked away. No one wanted to say what they were all thinking. That a white woman had just bought a savage for less than a sack of beans. He's yours, the man said. Stepping back, 2 boys untied the stranger from the post. He staggered, but stood tall. The sack stayed on until Clara stepped up and pulled it free herself. His eyes met hers, deep brown, unreadable, rimmed with dust and sweat. He didn't lower them. Neither did she. Clara turned without a word and led him to her mule cart. He climbed in without protest, shackles still heavy on his ankles. The ride out of town was quiet except for the creak of wood and the rhythm of hooves. The town shrank behind them like something that had never truly welcomed her, either. Her ranch sat quiet in the distance, a crooked fence, a house missing half its porch rail, and fields yellow with neglect. As she stopped the cart, the man waited. She stepped down first, dust rising around her boots. She didn't offer him help. He didn't need it. He followed her up the path. Not close, not far, just enough space for suspicion to live at the porch. She paused. Her key stuck in the old door like it always did. With a twist, it gave in. I don't expect you to talk, she said, back still turned to him. But if you've got any sense left in you, you'll know I don't lock doors for fear of people walking in. I lock them 'cause people leave. He didn't answer. She didn't wait for one. There's stew on the stove. Still warm. You can eat it or don't. Her voice cracked a little. She cleared it with a cough. There's a cot near the fire. You can sleep there, if you've a mind to. Still, no response. She stepped inside, left the door wide. He stood on the porch for a long time. Long enough for the sun to stretch low and the shadows to settle like old coats on the railing. Then, quiet as wind through dry grass, he crossed the threshold. Behind him, the screen door didn't slam. It closed like a whisper. Rain fell straight and steady across the prairie, not in torrents, but in that slow, stubborn way that soaked through everything, soil, bone, and memory. It patted softly against the tin roof, ran down warped windows, and turned the dirt path outside Clara's house to black soup. The kind of rain that made the past stir. Inside, the stranger sat near the hearth, cross-legged on the floor, his back to the flames. He never quite closed his eyes. Even when sleep claimed him, they stayed half open, like he didn't trust sleep not to take something from him. Clara noticed. She noticed a lot. She noticed, too, that he never touched anything more than once. If he drank from a tin cup, he washed it after, placed it back where it had been. If he stepped across the floor, he left no mud behind. And when he finally took off his coat, if that rag could be called a coat, she saw his back in full. There were scars. Not one or two, but a map of them, some faint, long-healed, others more recent, still raw where lash met skin. Some burns looked years old. A patch of skin on his left shoulder was warped, like someone had once pressed iron there. She didn't ask. But that night, when she ladled stew into his bowl and slid it across the table, her hand lingered longer than it had the night before. Outside, the wind pushed against the shutters like it was searching for a way in. Inside, the air between them was thin but full, with silence, with questions, with something neither of them had language for. In the barn, her late husband's tools still hung on the wall where he'd left them. A hammer with a split handle. A rusted rifle no longer trusted to fire. A saddle, heavy and stiff, sat in the loft, never touched since the funeral. She had once tried to ride again, just to remember how it felt. But the horse had bucked, and she hadn't tried since. In the mornings, she tended to the chickens, her fingers stiff from the cold. She repaired fence rails with bent nails and knotted twine. And then she realized something. Where she stopped, he continued. A post she had left sagging stood straight the next day. The broken hinge on the coop door was replaced, not new, but fitted from scrap. Her coat, once slumped on a chair, hung neatly on a nail by the door. He never told her he'd done any of it. But she knew, and she let him. Their language became small gestures, a bowl placed just so, a fire already lit when she woke. Her rocking chair turned to face the window on days the clouds sat heavy. She caught herself watching him sometimes through the glass when he stood under the eaves, face tipped toward the rain, letting it wash over him like it was the only thing in the world that didn't expect anything of him. One morning, the rain lightened, the clouds pulling apart like old cloth. Clara brought in dry kindling and stepped inside to find the house too still. Not empty, just still. She followed the silence down the hallway she never used anymore. The door to the back room, the one with blue trim and a faded quilt nailed to the wall, was cracked open. He stood inside. The room hadn't changed in 3 years. Dust covered the dresser. A wooden train lay beneath the bed where it had fallen the night fever took hold. The walls bore stars, not painted, but stitched in a child's hand onto a hanging quilt. And in his hands, the stranger held a small blanket. It was frayed at the edges. Tiny white stars on dark cloth. Her son's favorite. Clara's breath caught. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. He looked at her, not startled, not ashamed, just still. Then, gently, he folded the blanket back the way a mother might, slow, careful, and laid it where it had been. She turned and left first. Not in anger, not in fear. She just didn't want him to see what her face was doing. That night, she locked her bedroom door, not out of fear of him, but of something more exposed. She lay awake, listening to the creak of the roof, the sigh of old wood, and the hush of his steps near the fire. It wasn't the quiet that haunted her. It was how much it reminded her of someone who had also once tried not to take up space. She didn't sleep. But she didn't cry either. There was no point. When she rose at dawn, coffee already brewed, boots by the door, and the fire still glowing, she knew he hadn't slept either. The sky changed without warning. One moment, it was pale and cloudless. The next, it bruised with an eerie yellow tint, as if the sun had turned its back on the land. The wind shifted low and mean, carrying the scent of dry earth and trouble. Clara looked up from the water trough and knew the storm wasn't coming. It was here. She dropped the feed bucket and ran for the barn, skirts catching in the wind, boots slipping in loose dust. The chickens scattered. The mule brayed once in protest, rope straining. She made it to the barn door just as it groaned. Open on its own. Dust and grit screamed across the prairie like invisible claws. She pushed against the door, trying to tie it shut, when a gust slammed it closed, right on her hand. Pain shot through her wrist, white-hot and sharp. She gasped, staggered, nearly went down, but a shadow appeared from nowhere. He caught the beam with both hands, lifted it, freed her without a sound. The stranger's face was tight with focus. Not alarm, not concern, just quiet urgency. Her hand throbbed, already swelling. She clutched it to her chest. He glanced at her, then the sky, then back at her hand. His jaw worked like he was chewing on a decision. Then he bent low, gently looped an arm beneath her knees, and lifted her like a sack of oats. Clara didn't protest. She didn't have the strength. The wind flung grit against the windows as they made it inside. He kicked the door shut behind him with a booted foot and set her down by the hearth like she was something fragile. She watched him tear a strip from the ragged lining of his own shirt and soak it in water before kneeling in front of her. He held her hand in his rough ones, cracked, calloused, and surprisingly steady. With a tenderness she hadn't expected from someone so silent, so feared, he wrapped the cloth around her wrist and tied it snug. She winced. He paused, waiting. She shook her head. Go on. Lightning cracked somewhere far off, but the sound came late. The kind of delay that meant it wasn't over yet. She watched him settle back against the hearth, his knees pulled up, arms resting atop them. The fire flickered across his face, highlighting the shadows more than the light. Still, he said, nothing. I had a son, she said, voice low, not sure why the words came at all. Named Levi. He liked stars. Not real ones. The kind you sew. I stitched him for him on a quilt. He died 4 winters ago. Fever. No reaction. Only breath. And my husband, she added, slower, died before that. Stubborn man. Too proud to ask for help when the fever came. Thought it was just chill. Wouldn't let me call the doctor until it was too late. She paused, then gave a humorless smile. I buried them both with the same shovel. The storm rattled the house like an old man trying to rise from a cold bench. Wind found its way through cracks in the frame and hissed softly along the walls. The rocking chair groaned beneath her as she leaned back, exhaustion creeping up her spine. The stranger didn't speak, didn't need to. Silence, she was learning, could hold more truth than all the words in the world. She pulled the blanket off the back of the chair, draped it over herself, and closed her eyes. The ache in her hand dulled, steadied. Outside, the storm was a wild animal pacing the edge of the fence, snarling but not brave enough to come through the door. She didn't mean to sleep, but the weight of pain and memory carried her under, slow and deep like sinking in molasses. When she stirred again, the fire had dimmed to amber coals. The house was still, except for one thing. The blanket she dropped now rested neatly over her shoulders. Tucked in, not thrown. Tucked, like a mother would do for a child. Her hand was still wrapped, but someone had added a second cloth around the first, warmer, softer. The pain had eased. She smelled coffee before she opened her eyes fully. The pot sat on the stove, steam curling into the cold morning like smoke off a prayer. She blinked, turned. The stranger wasn't inside. Through the crooked window, she saw him, outside, beneath the gray remnants of the storm. His shirt was soaked, clinging to the lines of his back. His hair, loose now, whipped around his shoulders. He stood with his face to the wind, eyes closed, chest rising slow, and even like he'd spent the night breathing in the fury of it and letting it pass through him. Clara rose without thinking. She stood at the window, one hand pressed to the glass. Watching him. It wasn't a storm he feared. It was the world inside. Spring crept in like a cautious guest, trailing mud and possibility. Clara and the stranger began working the land together, side by side, but never speaking. She handed him tools. He used them. They mended the broken chicken coop, tilled the stubborn field where nothing had grown in 3 years. When the mule pulled too hard, he steadied it. When the fence post leaned, she held it while he drove the stake. Their rhythm had become a kind of dance, quiet, necessary, and full of space. And people noticed. The first to arrive was the preacher, his hat in his hands, his eyes scanning the yard like it was a battlefield. He said things without saying them. Asked if she was safe. Asked if she'd lost her senses. She told him she had lost many things, but not her senses. Next came the sheriff. On horseback. Didn't dismount. You know who he is? He asked. No, Clara said. And neither do you. He left with a snort, dust trailing behind him like insult. The last was the neighbor, Mrs. Whitley, 2 miles north and full of warnings. You're keeping trouble too close, she said, voice tight as a fence wire. Those people, Clara, didn't let her finish. I keep chickens. I keep wind from the cracks in my walls. And I keep to myself. That's enough keeping for me. That night, the silence was different. He sat by the fire, a piece of dry pine in his hands, knife working slow and careful. The room smelled of wood shavings and old smoke. Clara busied herself with sweeping a floor that didn't need it, but she kept watching him. He carved the wood into a shape, not a weapon, not a tool. A bird. Rough at the edges, wings not quite even, but delicate, gentle. She didn't say a word, just left a slice of bread near his elbow before heading to bed. She coughed in the night, a sharp, persistent thing that clawed up from her ribs. Before she could reach for the water on her nightstand, the door creaked open. He stood there, holding a tin cup. Steam curled upward from it. He didn't look at her, didn't speak, just handed her the cup, then backed into the hallway and disappeared like a shadow chased by firelight. She didn't sleep for a while after that. Instead, she thought about the way he watched the walls, how he always sat with his back to the hearth and his face toward the door, as if danger wasn't gone, as if danger lived inside the seams of every house, waiting for the latch to lift. The next morning, she found the carved bird resting on the table beside her sewing basket. No note, no explanation. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands. There was a crack across its back, like the wood had split during the carving and he'd smoothed it anyway. She ran her thumb along it. Gentle, unfinished. Human, the barn smelled of hay and damp air. She opened the doors to let in light. The rain had stopped, but the soil was still soft, earth ready for something to take root. Inside, she found the broken saddle mended, the leather restitched, the frame patched. With care. He hadn't asked. He had simply done it. She stood in the doorway for a long while, her hand resting on the frame. The same frame where he'd once stood watching her son's room, where the wind had pushed and he had not. Outside, the chickens clucked, the mule chewed on rope, and the wind moved quietly through the grass like it was trying not to wake anything. Sleeping, the storm had passed days ago, but another had settled inside her. Something she couldn't name. It wasn't fear. It was the knowledge that even silence has weight. And his was pressing into hers, breath by breath, gesture by gesture, like warm wood expanding against warm wood in winter, slow, inevitable, irreversible. The first snow arrived like a whisper, not loud or heavy, just enough to silver the tops of the fence posts and turn the prairie pale. Clara noticed it before sunrise, standing at the window with her shawl pulled tight. The sky was quiet, the air still, and the land looked softer than it had in years. Her coat hung by the door, worn thin at the elbows. She sighed, pulled it on, and turned toward her bedroom, only to stop short. On the edge of her bed lay another coat. Heavier, warmer, not hers. She touched it, fingers tracing the seams. It smelled faintly of pine and smoke. She looked toward the hall. He had never stepped foot in her room before. Not that she'd seen, not that she knew. She picked it up and pulled it close, just for a moment. It wasn't a gift wrapped with ribbon. It was a gesture, quiet, almost bashful. That morning, she left something for him in return. Her late husband's gloves, worn leather, soft now with age, but still whole. She placed them on the table where he carved. Didn't say a word. He saw them as he passed, paused, looked to her. She offered only a nod. He returned it, slow, small. A reply. That night, the wind howled across the plain, rattling the shutters like old bones again. She ladled stew into 2 bowls and set one near the hearth, then sat beside him with her own. They ate in the hush of firelight, the only sound, the scrape of spoons and the creak of her chair. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. Finally, he didn't look at her. "I was, maybe, the first night, but not since." Still nothing. She turned slightly. "What I'm afraid of is remembering how it feels to need someone, to want someone near." A log in the fire cracked, sending sparks up the chimney. His eyes flicked toward her. Then, he set down his bowl. The silence stretched. Then, softly, like something precious being unwrapped after years in the dark, he spoke. "Nakai." The word hung in the air between them. She blinked. "That's your name?" He nodded. Once, she repeated it, slowly. "Nakai." It felt like saying something holy, something unburied. His voice was rough, the syllables shaped like stones worn, smooth in water. But it was steady, the first word he'd given her, not a story, not a history, just a name. It was enough. Later, she found him outside, even as the snow thickened. He stood at the chopping stump, sleeves rolled, muscles moving beneath his shirt as he brought the axe down clean through a log. Again, again. Steam rose from his skin, the cold not touching him the way it touched her. She watched from the doorway. A moment, holding 2 cups of coffee. Then she stepped into the night. The air bit her cheeks. The world glowed white. He paused when she reached him. She offered a cup. He took it, his fingers brushing hers. They both held on a second too long. His hands were warm from the work. Hers, cold from the cup. Neither moved away. Her breath caught. He looked down at their hands. Then up. Into her, not past her. Not around. Her. Into her. Her voice, when it came, was small. I thought I forgot how this felt. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The space between them wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the fire they hadn't spoken of, but had been tending all along. Through carved birds, shared silence, bandaged hands, and second coats laid gently on old beds, the fire that didn't burn that it warmed. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge when the boy arrived, and no more than 20, lean like a snake, and twice as bitter. His boots were polished, his coat too fine for this land. The dust hadn't touched him yet, but it would. He rode up fast, dismounted hard, and walked right past the chickens like they didn't matter. Clara stood in the doorway, apron dusted with flour, heart already bracing. "You Clara Tate?" he asked, voice sharp as a spur. "I am," she said, wiping her hands on the cloth. "I'm Elijah Porter. My daddy was Thaddeus Porter. You're late. Husband's cousin. That makes me heir to this land, ma'am. I've got papers. This here ranch is mine." She didn't blink. "Your kin never set foot on this dirt." "Still blood," he said. "And blood don't lie." Nakai stepped from the barn then, quiet as always, shoulders wide and still. He didn't move toward them, just stood by the door, watching. Elijah's eyes narrowed. "That him," he said, gesturing with his chin. "That's the Apache everyone's whispering about. You let him sleep under your roof." Clara didn't answer. "Well, he'll have to go. Can't have that kind around. Not on my land." Nakai didn't react. He simply nodded once, turned, and walked back inside. He understood that he always did, but Clara didn't. She stepped off the porch. Slow. Firm. "You're mistaken," she said. "This land isn't yours." "I've got papers," Elijah repeated, waving a folded deed. "So do I." She pulled her own from beneath her shawl. Older, faded, edges curled, but with a signature scrawled at the bottom. "My husband signed this over to me before he passed. You'll find it filed in town." Elijah snatched it, read it, scowled. "Forged." "No," she said. "He maybe lied plenty in life, but that was the last true thing he did. He gave me this land. You've got nothing here but dust and air." The boy spat near her feet. "You'll regret this." She didn't flinch. The sheriff came by later, hat in hand, eyes already tired of the mess. Looked at both deeds. Sighed. "Let the boy holler," he told Clara. "Far as the records go, this place is yours." Clara nodded, but when she returned to the house, the fire had gone cold. Nakai was packing. Not much. He didn't own much. Just a blanket, the gloves, and the carving knife. She stood in the doorway, throat tight. "You don't have to go," she said. He didn't look at her. Just kept folding his things. "You think I asked you to stay because I needed someone to plow fields, carry water?" Still no answer. "I didn't buy you," she whispered. "I chose you. That's different." He stopped then, turned. His eyes weren't angry. They were something else. Tired, maybe. Unsure. "I asked you to stay because I need someone, not something. Do you understand?" He looked at her, long and deep. Then he nodded that he didn't speak. He didn't need to. The next morning, the chicken coop door was already fixed before she woke. A new handle, carved smooth. The stew pot was warm. And outside, the mule was saddled for the ride to town. They didn't walk close. They didn't walk far apart either. Just together, side by side, the town watched. Of course they did. Eyes from windows, behind curtain lace. But no one spoke. Even whispers get tired when nothing changes. They traded grain, bought new nails, repaired the broken wheel on the cart. When the sun hung low, they rode back. Two shadows stretched across the prairie like they'd always been part of it home. As the sky burned gold, Nakai reached into his satchel and pulled out the wooden bird. Still cracked, still beautiful. He placed it on the windowsill. The wind blew that night, hard enough to shake the porch chairs, scatter the chicken feed, and pull loose an old shingle, but the bird didn't move. When Clara stepped outside, cup of coffee in hand, she found him already there, a chair drawn up beside hers. He didn't speak, just Saturday, and somehow, it felt like he'd always been sitting there, just waiting for her to come home.